Pleasure to be here speaking to a pediatric audience. My wife is a pediatrician and they have a dear place in my heart. Thank you for inviting me. One of the things that brought me here was after founding Attorneys for the Rights of the Child, I went to the United Nations and spoke about circumcision in 2001 as a human rights violation, and more recently I published an article responding to the AAP's position on male circumcision, which the AAP in turn responded back to. That's part of my connection with this issue. So the norm, normal genitalia. Every boy and girl is born genitally intact, we know that. Circumcision is the exception. 70% of men worldwide are intact, that is not circumcised. Circumcision is rare in the Western world. Men do not choose it for themselves. There's an extremely small number of adults choosing it, and that shows that most men, in fact, do not feel that it is necessarily something they need to do if they become adults and they aren't circumcised. The American Academy of Pediatrics in 2012 said in their policy statements and technical report, although health benefits are not great enough to recommend circumcision for all male newborns, benefits are sufficient to justify access for families. It's a bit of a balancing act because it does, as Dr. Brady mentioned, they're not recommending it, and yet they're saying it justifies Medicaid coverage. Do other medical associations agree with the AAP? Let's see. The Dutch Medical Association in 2010, the RACP, which is Australia and New Zealand in 2010, and the UK in 2006, their latest statements on the topic pretty much in uniform disagreement with the American Academy of Pediatrics position. The other organizations believe that benefits do not exceed losses, acknowledge ethical problems, discuss them, acknowledge legal problems, and discuss them. And 2 out of the 3 compare the practice to female genital mutilation. So the AAP statement last year had many problems. It contradicted itself, saying the incidence of complications is unknown. How can you possibly say benefits exceed risks when you don't know by your own admission what the complications are? Secondly, circumcision helps prevent HIV. The AAP does say that, but it also says, I quote, key studies were performed in poverty-stricken African populations with HIV burdens that are epidemiologically different from HIV burdens in the US, and this wasn't a call for further studies. So I don't see why the AAP would be calling for further studies if they had all the information they needed. The AAP statement didn't have any studies from the last 2 years included, very selective review of data, no case reports included. No discussion of the anatomy or function of the foreskin. You're cutting something off that's healthy. Shouldn't you say what it does, what it's for? No discussion of ethics, well, no meaningful discussion of ethics. The word does appear in the statement, but no discussion of autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, which is Douglas Deacon has discussed, that these are the 4 cornerstone principles of ethics. No meaningful discussion of the law. Parents are in fact not granted wide latitude to do whatever they want with their children. The basic rule is that the boundary of permissible action, if there's no emergency, stops where someone else's body starts. And Prince versus Massachusetts, US Supreme Court 1944 says that. No discussion of human rights in the AAP statement. It's been the supreme law of the land since before the Begay-Habana decision in 1900, but that was one of the most famous decisions. So the child is the patient, not the parent. I think we can all agree on that. Dr. Brady said in his talk that it's reasonable, I would contest that, for physicians to operate on healthy boys for religious, cultural, or personal reasons, regardless of parental wishes. All decisions that can be deferred must be deferred, and the AAP Committee on Bioethics said that very thing in 1995 in their position on informed consent, which is still valid, hasn't been revised. So first, do no harm. Don't harm the healthy. If health benefits, including lower complication rates, were not lost by deferring the procedure, then we're in agreement. The decision would clearly be to defer. So let's see, does circumcision have enough benefits to justify it? Urinary tract infections. Frisch in 2013 put out a response to the AAP statement that was published in Pediatrics. 38 premier physicians and scholars in the area. The only argument for infant male circumcision with any possible relevance to children, according to Frisch, is UTIs. And so in other words, all other reasons don't justify failing to defer it until a later age. Frisch says you'd be circumcising at least 100 boys to benefit one. Toe 1998 says 195. We'll go with the lower Frisch number. Frisch says 100. Frisch also says 100 circumcisions cause 2 cases of hemorrhage, infection, or even more serious complications such as death. So So how about treatment prophylaxis with antibiotics if we have a problem? Safe, inexpensive, non-invasive, widely available? Conclusion, no, and that's what Frisch says. Penile cancer occurs in old age. We all know that smoking, not smoking and washing do a great thing to reduce the percentages very low, and it's one of the rarest forms of cancer anyway. You're more likely to get hit by lightning than you are to get penile cancer. Well, it's about the same, actually, penile cancer and lightning. Why do rates of penile cancer in the US exceed those in Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Japan, none of which are hotbeds for circumcision? HIV. So the AP itself says the numbers from African men are not shown to apply to American newborns, as I said already. Recent evidence from Gonzalez, 2013, this just came out less than a month ago, suggests no protective effect among American men. And he says, I quote, challenges common beliefs regarding the protective nature of circumcision. Garan, another study that just came out, protection provided is negligible or nil for HIV and other STDs. Garan queries, reasonably enough, you still need a condom, and a condom's enough without circumcision, so what does circumcision gain you? Conclusion, no. Let's just say hypothetically Dr. Brady's right, and the HIV arguments work. What I'm hearing is basically public health arguments to try to trump an ethical issue. We'll look at the ethical issue in a moment. But it doesn't work that way. Public health arguments can't trump ethical arguments. Because, I'm quoting from Frisch again, the cardinal medical question is not whether circumcision can prevent disease, but how disease can best be prevented. Sounds reasonable. First, do no harm. It's irreversible, it's unnecessary, it's not therapeutic. It's not recommended by any national medical association in the world, including the AAP. Performed without a diagnosis. Regret as adults is common. We're learning more and more about that. I just put up 2 of the citations. There's plenty more. Frisch had another study in 2011 about orgasm difficulties in men and frequent sexual difficulties in women. My lettering for these statements is black, so it's not visible. It's not visible here either. Oh, here we go. I'll let you read that. This is one man's comment. Another man. I'd be the first to agree that's highly anecdotal. But what's not anecdotal is that there's thousands, literally thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more men who are very upset about what happened. And some who sadly passed away. Everybody on this page died as a result of their circumcision, either directly or indirectly. The upper left died June 2012, blood loss. On the right, died March 2013, blood loss. The 2 middle pictures are about David Reimer, who lost his penis as a baby and then was raised as a girl. So there wrote a book about him, John Colapinto, and he committed suicide. There's plenty more. We'll see one more baby later in this presentation. So let's examine other procedures that are analogous to male circumcision. Maybe we can learn something. Let's start by listing all the other procedures that share the following characteristics. Not medically necessary, done where there's no problem or emergency, irreversibly removes functional tissue, and a non-consenting child. Let's see what there is. Couldn't find anything. 2 questions regarding ethical principles. Is it ethically acceptable to surgically alter the natural genitals of a child when no compelling therapeutic reason exists? What's the appropriate age to get permission for elective non-therapeutic cutting of your genitals? We'll look at both these questions later. Meanwhile, ethical concerns are mounting. Margaret Somerville is Canada's premier medical ethicist. She's a physician. If we view a child's foreskin as having a valid function, we are no more justified in amputating it than any other part of the child's body, unless the operation is medically required treatment and the least harmful way to provide that treatment. Finnish Medical Association 2012, child circumcisions conflict with medical ethics. Circumcision is the core statement of the ethical problem. Non-therapeutic, medically unnecessary, irreversible amputation of a normal, healthy, functioning body part from a non-consenting person. The easy solution, wait. We saw earlier there's only one medical condition that even arguably doesn't allow you to wait, and that doesn't work, UTIs, fails. So just wait. Minors may only be exposed to medical treatments if illness or abnormalities are present. But the circumcision off until the boy can decide for himself. That's the Royal Dutch Medical Association, 2010. By the way, nobody's saying we have to wait till 18. The UK has a graduated theory of consent where you can wait till 14 for some decisions, till 16 for others. Sliding scales can be used. We're not being absolutists here. The disadvantages we don't weigh. Well, there's the dangers. Untoward events. The American Medical Association in 1999, in a statement they never have changed since then, acknowledged these events. Williams and Capella landmark study 2 to 10% level complications. Judy recently came out with a 20% number. The AAP says the number is unknown. We have many botched circumcisions. Estimated deaths in the US each year are more than 100. It's a small likelihood, but if it happens to your child, you can bet that's something you're going to regret. David Gibbons, pediatric urologist, Georgetown University Hospital. In a 2-year period, I was referred over 275 newborns and toddlers with complications of neonatal circumcision. 45% required corrective surgery. 7.4% of all visits to pediatric urologist at Mass General Hospital over 5 years were for circumcision complications. That's from Krill 2011. Post-operative complications that we don't weigh. Bleeding. Long-term aggravated response to pain. Caddio documented that in a landmark study. Infection, needle stenosis, MRSA, etc. Severe permanent disability or death. So you saw Joshua Haskins' picture earlier, or sorry, you saw Braden Tyler Frazier's picture earlier. Joshua Haskins also died from blood loss. There's numerous others. So who are the advantages for if we circumcise early? CDC says let's circumcise early, it's easier. Who are the advantages for? Well, it's easier to hold down a newborn for sure. Consent of the patient himself is not required. Can't be obtained, in fact. Mamucci says there's more complications in circumcisions done during the neonatal period. Very interesting study. What about loss of tissue? Other complications? Pain. De Maria recently came out with a somewhat disturbing study about the lack of formal training for physicians doing circumcision. May explain the complications, unsatisfactory results. Many are unaware of the contraindications, and most non-surgeons can't handle common complications. Let's see if we can answer the questions we posed earlier now. Is it ethically acceptable to surgically alter the natural genitals when no compelling therapeutic reason exists? No, it's not. Childhood circumcision is only acceptable in those vanishingly rare cases in which medically necessary and conservative interventions fail. Who should be getting permission for cutting off your own genitals? The owner of the penis, the male himself. No ethical problem with circumcision of consenting, adequately informed adults. So what ethical justifications are there? A medical benefits or therapeutic justification for the procedure requires, this is Dr. Somerville again, benefits sought outweigh the losses, only reasonable way to obtain the benefits, and necessary to the well-being of the child. Dr. Somerville says none of these conditions is fulfilled for routine infant male circumcision. Dr. Deacon has spoken about the 4 fundamental ethical principles. Autonomy, which is more commonly known as privacy. They're not exact equivalents, but they're close. Beneficence, is it reasonably expected to do good? Non-maleficence, does it avoid doing harm? Do no harm? And justice, is it fair? Is circumcision ethical? If there's one fundamental rule, it's autonomy. Patient autonomy is really the bedrock. Necessary to protect freedom, privacy. All decisions that can be deferred must be deferred. That's the AAP Committee on Bioethics, 1995. AMA Ethical Opinion 2.19. Unnecessary surgery is prohibited. The physician shouldn't seek unnecessary surgery either. They shouldn't be soliciting circumcisions. When my son was about to be born, I was solicited 5 times in Guam. I said to them, there's no medical reason for this. Do you know that? They said, oh, we know. I said, well, why are you asking me? They didn't really have an answer. Commercial use of human tissue violates AMA Ethical Opinion 2.08. No commercial use of human tissue. This is not widely known, but foreskins sold without patient consent violate medical ethics, and it's commonly done. It's actually very lucrative. There's a number of products that these foreskins are used for to generate artificial tissue, artificial skin. Is circumcision ethical? What about the physician's duty being to the patient? We saw already the Bioethics Committee of the AAP commented on that. The parents' desires aren't really the issue. The parents are going to have their desires and they're going to have their wishes. But physicians can operate on healthy boys for religious, cultural, or personal reasons, regardless of parental wishes. And that again is the AAP Bioethics Committee. As Diekman has written, the ethical rule of proportionality also applies. Benefits must be proportional to risks and losses. This is obvious stuff, but a physician can't amputate a broken leg. It can be put in a cast and fixed that way. So, core statement of legal problem. Do boys, like girls, have a right to bodily integrity? Do physicians have a right to circumcise healthy boys? Do parents have a legal right to approve circumcision? The advantages don't exceed the disadvantages. Removes a healthy, functional body part, taking away the right to decide for oneself. As far as what Dr. Brady, male circumcision versus female genital mutilation, they aren't exactly the same. I'm not standing up here and saying they are. But what I'm also saying is that the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2010, in April 2010, issued a statement where it condoned minor forms of FGM, and then in June 2010 it withdrew it, saying even the most ceremonial nick is not permissible. So why are we allowing extensive male circumcision when even nicks are not allowed for females? I'm not advocating nicks for females, I'm just calling attention to the difference. We have some cultural background that makes it hard for us to be objective about this issue. I'll be the first to admit that. Legal concerns are mounting. Virginia, 2003, a young man who did not have a so-called bodge. The mother properly agreed with the circumcision. He recovered legally. Austria, 2007, circumcision is irreversible, not medically necessary. Cologne last year in Germany, this is a big one, a very sweeping decision holding the doctor criminally liable for circumcision. There was some legislation passed since then, but the court decision is still valid. 2013 in Hamm, Germany, another decision just came out about a month ago. Mother could not have a doctor perform male circumcision on a healthy, normal 6-year-old child. What do these decisions matter overseas? Who cares? Well, who cares is the German system is actually very similar to the US, and we're influenced by decisions in other countries. They do have an effect. A couple developments more recently. September 24th, less than a month ago, Swedish legislators introduced a bill to outlaw circumcision. October 1st, Council of Europe passed a recommendation endorsing a child's right to physical integrity and a resolution opposing male circumcision. They were specifically speaking to male circumcision there. Is circumcision already illegal? Well, it's the human rights, supreme law of the land. So human rights are these documents that are created by international bodies that the US, in some cases, signs and or ratifies. Numerous case laws said that human rights are the supreme law of the land, along with the Constitution. And some of the rights that are guaranteed by human rights include the right to life, liberty, and security, the right to freedom from cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, right to equal protection. Equal protection means you can't treat males differently than females, you can't treat black people differently than white people, etc. Special rights for children. Right to opportunities to develop physically, mentally, morally, spiritually, and socially. Right to protection from all forms of mental and physical violence. Right to protection from traditional practices prejudicial to the health of children. This is US law, as I wrote in my other article in the Journal of Medical Ethics about human rights. What's a tort? Nobody who hasn't gone to law school knows what a tort is, and maybe that's a lucky thing. But a tort is a civil wrong, basically. You can't sue for it in criminal law, but maybe a criminal action that goes along with it in some cases, but a tort is a civil wrong. You're suing somebody because they harmed you somehow. And so circumcision has numerous theories under which it can be sued for as a tort. There's been a list published of over 50 circumcision-related lawsuits and settlements, ranging up to $32 million. Is circumcision already illegal? How about consent? I put that in quotes because you're obviously not getting the consent of the actual person. You're getting the consent of the so-called consent of the parent, guardian. Must be an actual medical need, not valid for non-therapeutic procedures. Fully informed parental consent is required, otherwise it's assault and battery. And parents are, this is an interesting one, parents are not fully informed. Now, Longley 2009 did this great, extensive, detailed work on all the disconnects in the informed consent process with circumcision. And the Real Star study that she was looking at, she did her own research, but she also went back and looked at CSCLC Carlucci from 1996. There's a couple other good ones, but it's really disillusioning when you learn how often the informed consent process fails. It's not for lack of well-meaning physicians, it just happens. Is circumcision already illegal? The word trump came up in one of the earlier presentations. Boys' rights trump their parents' rights. Boys have an absolute right to be left intact. Bodily integrity and autonomy that we discussed earlier, and security of person in the 5th and 14th Amendments of the US Constitution, also the supreme law of the land. Parents' rights are subordinate. Prince versus Massachusetts, the German case that I quoted earlier. Congress has said the same about girls' rights. When they passed the law against female genital mutilation, they have language saying that basically girls' rights trumps the parents' rights. We're not going to let that interfere with the children's rights. Is circumcision already illegal? Well, it's beyond the scope of medicine. Having a foreskin is not a medical condition or disease. The medical associations around the world say circumcision is not medically justified. Circumcision is beyond the scope of medicine. Medicaid. This is an interesting topic. I hear a lot about Medicaid. My wife sees a lot of Medicaid patients. Medicaid is only supposed to cover necessary care. It's actually illegal to use it for care that isn't necessary. Cosmetic, elective, ritual procedures are specifically not covered. Dr. Brady referred to 18 states defunding after the AAP 1999 statement. That's incorrect. There were 6 states that were not funding Medicaid prior to 1999, the first being California, which defunded in 1982. It is true that 12 states defunded after the 1999 statement, presumably based on the information that was contained in that statement, which got widely distributed. And I do want to say the AAP, I don't want this to sound like a criticism of the AAP. Not at all. I mean, I consider the AAP to be a very eminent, excellent organization. I consider this to be the only issue that basically I would part ways with them on. I mean, it's very tireless advocate for children. So I just wanted to say that. Those are the 6 states that defunded before the 1999 statement. Is circumcision already illegal? What about equal protection? Males and females must be treated equally. The 5th and 14th Amendments say that. So I'm going to repeat what I said earlier just to sort of explain it a little more. In April 2010, observers were quite surprised because we weren't aware of any particular stimulus for this event. Dr. Brady may be privy to it, but we weren't aware of what the backstory was. But April 1st, actually, 2010, April Fool's Day, the AAP came out with this statement saying that symbolic forms of cutting were okay. Part of what's going on there is that there's a faction of people who are in their cultures, and they feel uncomfortable if the practice is not continued. And so there's this hope that by bringing in some sort of symbolic version of it, that their desires could be met while at the same time not removing any tissue. And that's been very controversial. There's plenty of scholars about female genital cutting that viciously oppose this idea. Others that say that it's a good way to mediate the problems. So the AAP came out with a statement on April 1st saying that it was okay to do that. A lot of controversy, a lot of people upset, a lot of people feeling, how can you do that? How can you say that any form of cutting a girl's tissue is okay? How can you do that? You're the American Academy of Pediatrics. So they retracted the statement. There was a press release that came out in May 2010 from the AAP president, and then they formally issued a statement correcting it in June 2010, reiterating their previous position that all forms of FGM are wrong. So what that brings us to is this puzzle. Okay, so as I said, we're not saying female cutting and male cutting are exactly the same. Not at all. I would never claim that. That would be ridiculous. But how can it be wrong to surgically alter the genitals of a baby girl, but okay to surgically alter the genitals of a baby boy? And there are lots of scholars who aren't really involved with this male circumcision issue particularly. Some of them are more aligned with the female genital cutting issue, who've written about this and who express outrage at the US actually for being culturally imperialistic, for saying that your cutting is bad and our cutting is good. Their attitude is, what are you talking about? I mean, you're taking a boy, you're cutting off functional tissue. You can say till you're blue in the face it doesn't have any sexual harm, it doesn't hurt. Come on, it's half of the surface skin of his penis. It stands to reason, common sense, it probably has an effect, be my guess. The data is hard to gather because it's hard to survey people about sexuality. The questions get designed differently, they get very, very fuzzy, it's very hard to pin down. It seems likely that there's some effect in removing functional tissue. And whether there's an effect or not, isn't it the boy's right to decide if there's no pressing medical need, which we've seen there isn't? Shouldn't that be the boy's decision? So my conclusion for Dr. Walling, the doctor that was named in the case, is the easy legal solution is to wait. I'm sure the parents of Angelo wish that he was still with us, died June 2012, blood loss. I'm sure the parents of Braden Tyler Frazier wish he was still with us, died of blood loss. I'm sure David Reimer's parents wish he was still here. I spoke to David Reimer on the phone, by the way, once. So what are the facts? Many disadvantages, no meaningful net benefits. Some of these points the AAP's statement actually concedes itself, some of them it doesn't. If you read Frisch, 2013, 38 eminent doctors, one Canadian personnel, the rest of them from Europe. Very convincing document, published in Pediatrics, by the way. And the AAP issued a response to that one as well. Facts are, it's not medically justified. It's already unethical. It violates many ethical rules. We saw the 4 major ethical principles that are violated by circumcision. It's inconsistent with the fundamental principle of autonomy and privacy. It's already illegal. Boys like girls have the right under many national laws to normal bodies and genitalia. When the Council of Europe is issuing proclamations, when these events are going on in Europe, the Finnish Medical Association is making declarations. I'm not sure what Dr. Brady was talking about with Denmark. I think that's probably not accurate. I looked at it and I didn't see that. We can talk about that later. But in any event, we've got the events in Finland, we've got the events in Sweden, both legislative events. We've got the events in Finland, we've got the events in the Council of Europe. There's a tide rising. We've got the lawsuits and the legal cases in Germany. There's a tide rising. People are really starting to think about these things. And this is what happens with politics, and this is what happens in the world, is people learn over time. Human rights were created, well, they really were created back many years ago, but they were sort of elaborated after World War II. People wanted to stop the horrors of World War II. They wanted to make sure they would never happen again. So the concept came up, every human being is endowed with basic rights from the day you're born. This was a revolutionary idea at the time. This was not something that people knew in their common sense. This was something that you really had to work on, you really had to come to understand. Revolutionary concept. Every human being is born wrapped in their own entitlements and their own rights to protection and to live their life to the fullest as best they can. Human rights is inconsistent with male circumcision. You saw earlier there's no analogies to this procedure. And here I am. I'm not a physician. Why is a non-physician addressing a pediatric ethics conference? Maybe it's partly because male circumcision is not a medical procedure. It's a cultural procedure that we've held on to ever since it got started 150 years ago. The medicalized version got started 150 years ago. In the US, there was this very quirky sort of situation where Louis Sayre thought that reflex neurosis was cured by this boy that he circumcised, and we were off to the races. But we're here now in 2013. We don't have to feel beholden to these mistakes that were made in earlier years. There's a lot of medical practices that we've abandoned. We've come to understand that they're not right for us anymore. Physicians cannot operate on healthy boys. What other condition is there a diagnosis saying healthy child? What other diagnosis, what other procedure is done with that diagnosis? This affects real children. Maybe there aren't many that are seriously harmed by it, but I can tell you for sure there are some. And the numbers are significant. The difference is that with other procedures, there's a reason for doing them, a medical reason for doing them, and this one there isn't, and that's the tragedy, really. Successful lawsuits are inevitable in the US. The tide is rising. Parents are learning about this. They're getting educated. They're asking questions. These events in Europe are going to come over to the US, and we're going to see an impact of it. We already have with this 2003 legal settlement. It's going to happen more. I'm not a litigator. I don't bring these cases, but there are people bringing these cases. The boy is the patient, not the parent. Circumcision is not in his best interests. First, do no harm. Thank you.